Hello, Girlsplainers! Today we are going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons, specifically diving into character creation. But first, a general overview of what Dungeons & Dragons is. It is a fantasy tabletop role-playing game created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. It was first published in 1974, and it's generally considered the beginning of modern role-playing games. There is a really interesting history involving the Satanic Panic of the 1980s. A lot of people thought that it would cause really bad things to happen, and it was doing bad things to their kids, and they wouldn't allow it, cue Stranger Things happening. So it's been through a sort of interesting history in the public light. It is currently in its 5th edition. This is commonly referred to as 5e, and that's just the set of rules that we use at this moment. How does it work? Well, there's generally one person called a Dungeon Master, DM. It also can be called a Game Master, and they lead the adventure. There are player characters, which are played by the players, and then non-player characters, or NPCs, which are usually played by the DM. Their characters form a party, they interact with their world, solving puzzles, doing battles, looking for loot, and going on quests. All of the elements of chance in this game are determined by rolling dice. So you've got a bunch of different dice with different numbers of sides. This is very commonly used. This is the D20. It's got 20 sides. There's also a D4, D6, D8, D10, and D12, and these are used for different kinds of checks and different kinds of things that are left up to chance in the game, and that is how you keep it interesting and not having to do so much decision-making on the part of the DM. Campaigns are run over the course of weeks, months, even years. I know there's some that have been going on for like a decade. There are also one-shots that are one-and-done adventures that you can complete in one session. And players create their characters using a basic template called a character sheet, which we have talked about in another video. But character creation can be really daunting, especially as a first-timer, because there's so many things. And if you take a look at the player's handbook, that will guide you through everything, but I'm here today to give you some tips on how I like to build characters, and then I will dive into some of the specifics of what those things in the player's handbook mean. There are so many different ways to build a character, and there's absolutely no wrong way. This is just how I like to do it. It really depends on your play style. I love a role-play heavy style, so I build roleplay forward characters that are still functional in turn-based stat-heavy scenarios. Sometimes it can get a little frustrating when people in the group are using different play styles, like if someone's really just metagaming and focusing on the stats and somebody's trying to have an interesting conversation in character, that can be a little mismatched, but it's all part of the fun. I like to come up with an interesting concept, and then I choose a class, race, and a background that suits it. My most recent example is one called Dusty. She is a ranger monster hunter, and her background is a folk hero, and we will get into what all of this means in a little bit. But I love to come up with something that's interesting that I want to play. What kind of voice do they have? What kind of story are they going to tell? So generally, what I'll want to do, even before I'm actually figuring out my stats and things, and I'm doing this a little backwards, but it works for me, I like to come up with a couple sentences of backstory that provide a basis for the things I'll be choosing. There's this common trope that D&D characters have tragic backstories, and I kind of like to twist that so it's maybe not so tragic, but really the key point is that they need a why. They need a motivation to be adventuring. Why did they leave their previous life? What were they doing before? Why are they here in this tavern now meeting other adventurers? I also like to start off with necessary equipment, but then leave myself an equipment goal so I can buy something should the opportunity arise. Maybe my character is a spellcaster, but their wand broke and I need a new wand, or I have a weapon, but I'd like a better weapon. So whenever there's a, shopping town scene, I'm not just like blindly walking through, but I also get to participate in the town shopping scene. Using my Dusty example for the several sentences of backstory, she is basically a cowgirl. And the not-so-tragic backstory is that her parents are simply getting too old to run the family farm, so she and her younger brother take over the farm. But then there's this big bad monster, and I'm working with my DM to say, is this actually something you can fit into your world building? So I get to have that fun little conversation. The big bad monster comes and eats the cattle. She is trained in monster hunting from this. This is bringing in the subclass of Monster Slayer, and she is adventuring to hunt it down. I also like to operate on the philosophy that it's not that deep. I wanted Dusty to have a rifle because it felt right for a cowgirl to have a rifle or a shotgun or something, but I didn't really want to spec out an artificer, which is kind of the way that you do guns and mechanical things like that in D&D. So I just checked with my DM and said, hey, can I reskin this longbow that the ranger gets as a gun? And they said, sure, fine. So I'm actually using the bow. I'm just calling it a gun for the purposes of the flavor of my character, which I like. It works pretty well and it simplifies a lot of things. I also extend this roleplay forward philosophy into the selections of my abilities, feats, and spells. So sometimes I will look through the spell list. Let's say I'm picking 4 spells. I'll probably pick 2 just for the name or the description that sounds like something that a cowgirl would do or a monster slayer would do, because that's the flavor that I'm looking for with the kind of roleplay games that I'm doing. And then I'll probably leave the other several up to like, what is actually going to be helpful for me. Maybe I need a buffing spell for my allies. Maybe I need something to actually do a lot of damage. So I do like to make it a balance of things that just kind of sound like it would be good. This is also helpful if you're either building a character in a hurry or you just like don't want to deal with the minutia. You can simply pick something that kind of sounds like the flavor of your character. So you've heard me reference class and subclass. This is one of the things that is the most affecting of how your character works in D&D, in my opinion. Some of them have subclasses or specific paths that you can follow within that. I will go through a couple of what the classes are. Really, it's just like, what is your job? You know, not are you a bartender or are you a warrior, but like what is your style? What's your thing? So here all of them are. We have a barbarian. This is very fighting focused, often melee. They can enter a rage, which gives them certain buffs and really good attacking things. They have high stats in strength and dexterity and constitution. We've got bards. They are musicians with light magic abilities. They're generally a support class in fights. They give people inspiration. There's a lot of role play. They've got high stats in charisma and dexterity. Clerics. These are a conduit for power from a god or deity. They're generally healers and warriors. They can prepare a number of spells, and they will expend spell slots as they cast them. They focus on wisdom, strength, and constitution. Druids are the nature people. They get their powers and spells from the force of nature itself, or from a nature deity. They have this cool thing called wild shape, which means they can transform into an animal, and they have high stats in wisdom and constitution. Fighters are well-rounded in all combat styles. They are trained soldiers. As you level up, you get many different attacks on one turn, which is super fun to do. They have strength or dexterity for melee focus, range focus, or constitution and intelligence, depending on how you want to structure your character there. Monks. These are characters that study magical energy. They have a lot of martial training. There's bonuses for being unarmed and unarmored. They often do hand-to-hand combat, and they focus on dexterity and wisdom. Paladins are bound by oaths to gods that give them power. The nature of the oath and their relationship to it is important, so sometimes there's somebody who's really devoted to their oath. Sometimes there's oath breakers, and that's all a big part of the paladin's core character traits. They have a strong sense of justice, and their high stats are in strength and charisma. Rangers, this is what mine was. Hunter, they are familiar with the wilds and easy movement across terrain. They like to target a specific mark and then hit that target. They focus on dexterity and wisdom. Rogues are tricksters or thieves. They're con artists, locksmiths, burglars. They are very quiet, stealthy, and precise. They focus on dexterity and either intelligence or charisma. Sorcerers. The next 3 are very similar. Sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards, but they all have key differences. Sorcerers have inherent magic from a gift or a bloodline. They use charisma for this. Warlocks have a magic derived from a deal with an entity or a deity. They enter a pact, and there's certain things that they may have to give to their patron. in order to receive their magical gifts. They also use charisma. And then finally, wizards. These are scholarly magic users who get their magic from their study. This is the book smarts one. And unsurprisingly, they use intelligence a lot. Another thing that you'll have to select when you're building a character is a race. So something to note is that sub-races are a thing. You might be an elf, but in that category of elf, you could be a wood elf, you could be a dark elf, there's several other kinds. These are different than half-elves, which are half elf and half something else, usually human. Race describes your general appearance and your natural talents. This can be senses, proficiencies, bonuses, and every race buffs an ability score. So that's something to think about maybe before, maybe after you pick your other things, and you can really tailor it to work in conjunction with your class. There's even more races than this, but just the general ones that are in the basic Player's Handbook 5e are dwarf, elf, halfling, human, dragonborn, gnome, half-elf, half-orc, and tiefling. And of course, in the lore, there's going to be predetermined thoughts and attitudes about each of those, and there's different regions that they may come from within the generalized lore. So what's a background? A background is where you came from, your place in the world, why you're adventuring. Good question to ask yourself when building your character is, what changed from then till now? It's a great jumping off point for the backstory. These also affect proficiencies, language, and equipment. Here are the backgrounds. An acolyte, which is somebody who was in service of a god. A charlatan, they've got away with people, a little bit of a trickster. Criminal, entertainer, folk hero, guild artisan, somebody who works in some sort of specific union or job thing. You've got a hermit, a noble, an outlander, a sage, sailor, soldier, and urchin. There are truly so many ways to build a character, and none of them are wrong. To recap, my concept is generally I like to pick a theme or a focus or a concept that I'm working with, and then I build out from there. I start with just a little bit of backstory, and then I add the class, then I think about the race, then I use the background, and I kind of filter in all of the other calculations that you've got to do. The Player's Handbook is also really helpful because if you go to the class section, it'll say how to quick build a bard. So if you're really in a hurry or you don't want to spend all the time reading all the things, you can take those suggestions right there. There's lots of ways to do it. You can look up ideas online. There's so many creative people out there who have lots of good jumping off points. So it is one of the most fun parts of D&D once you get past how daunting it is that there's just that much information. I hope that my method for creating a character is helpful for some of you, especially as beginner D&D players, and please leave me a message in the comments if you want to share your cool new character idea or if you have any questions about how I like to build them. See you next time.